Good afternoon. Welcome to session 4, Deepening Independence in the Reading Workshop. This is workshop number 12. We're happy to welcome Lindsey Moses to the Ed Collab gathering today. Lindsey comes to us as an associate professor of literacy education at Arizona State University. She's an author and a consultant. And her latest books are Supporting English Learners in the Reading Workshop and What Are the Rest of My Kids Doing? Fostering Independence in the K-12 workshop, reading workshop. Lindsey's a former elementary teacher, and she now works with classroom teachers across the country to support implementing effective literacy instruction. Her extensive research and experience gives us practical, impactful ideas for our classroom. Today, Lindsey's going to share her work with us on Deepening Independence in the Reading Workshop, and you can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #EdCollabGathering and the hashtag number 12 with a space in between. And you can also use her Twitter handle at Dr. Lindsey Moses. And now let's welcome Lindsey Moses.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here again. It's been such a great morning of learning and professional development from so many different experts and speakers. So I'm excited to go back and catch up on the ones that I haven't had a chance to catch yet. So I'm going to be talking today about thinking about ways we can support independence in the reading workshop. And so here's my Twitter handle and the Ed Collab Gathering space, hashtag 12. I also have my information on there if you want to reach out and chat at some point. So I also want to give a little shout out to my co-author, Meredith Ogden, who you'll see in a lot of these student images and experiences that we're talking about today. Today we're going to be talking about purposeful independent learning experiences and a model that we use to begin thinking about ways that we can support independence, provide students with strategies, thinking about reading responses, partner experiences, and small group experiences. So one of the things that I think is a challenge with independence is sometimes people think that independence is something where students are being busy or where they're being quiet. And when I think about purposeful independence, I think sometimes it's noisy. I think it includes talking. I think it includes meaningful reading work that is taking place when the teacher doesn't necessarily need to support them. That being said, the teacher often has to support them to get them to that point of independence, but we want to think about opportunities for independence, not just students being quiet or students being busy, and not just independent reading, though that's part of it. So a lot of this really started for me years ago when I was doing some consulting work, and I went into a classroom and I was observing a teacher. And so you'll see here I've got a tissue paper of a rainbow, and which is beautiful. And so it was during literacy time, and I asked the teacher, I said, or asked the student who was at the center, the teacher was teaching small group, I asked the kid what he was doing. And he said, well, this is the tissue paper station. And I said, what do you mean, the tissue paper station? And he said, we take tissue paper and we glue it on construction paper to make things. And I said, okay, are you making pictures of something that you had read? And the kid looked at me and said, he basically was like, it's the tissue paper station. We're just making pictures of things. So I thought, okay, he doesn't understand what he's supposed to be doing at this, independent literacy station. So I asked the teacher after the class, I said, what's going on with the tissue paper station? And she said, it's the only way I can get my kids to be quiet so that I can have small group with my students. So one rotation every day, 20 minutes essentially every day for students, was gluing tissue paper. And while I can 100% agree with the need and the value of meeting with students in small groups, we have to find ways to support meaningful independence when kids aren't with us during literacy time, because it is such a large part of their literacy learning experience. So if we think about a reading workshop, right, our time is kind of split between mini lessons, small group, and independent work. And even if your mini lesson is 15 minutes and you have the students for 20 minutes, that means 40% of their literacy time, 40% of their literacy time is spent independently. So that time shouldn't be spent doing worksheets, shouldn't be spent doing tissue paper stations. We want those experiences to be meaningful. So when I think about purposeful learning experiences, I think about what it is and what it is not. And sometimes it's easiest to start with things that I don't find to be purposeful. So I always ask myself, are these things that real readers do? Are these helping readers think deeper and more meaningfully? Typically worksheets, copying spelling words, looking up definitions, unrelated computer games, nonsense word practice. These aren't things that real readers do. And so these aren't things that I'm going to ask my students to spend or to do during the day when they're not with me. The things that I do want them doing might include reading with partners, might include document their thinking, it might include deeper reading experiences, discussion groups, performance groups, right? Inquiry projects and research projects. The idea is that we want students to demonstrate and practice those strategies that real proficient readers use. And those experiences should be meaningful and they should have a purpose other than getting a grade. So if I'm reading a book, we have to think about what I might do after that. And typically it's not go home and write the main idea and 3 details, right? So all of the things that we're going to talk about today that we've been doing in classrooms are really to think about deepening the meaning, but then also really making the work purposeful, the work of real readers. So we've kind of developed these 5 principles that we've found really help support independent and guide independent opportunities. The first one is developing a nurturing environment. So I know we all say this, but if we want kids to be independent, we have to foster that. We have to let them know that they're safe to read and take risks and chat with each other about books. You can see in this picture, that's Meredith, my co-author, meeting with 28 of her first graders as they're chatting about things that they read, that they were excited about, and how they deepen their reading, and also beginning to inspire some ideas for possible book clubs and partner reading. Another 2 of them reading below the loft, really getting excited about their reading work. The next one, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is we have to appreciate choice. Kids are more engaged, they're more independent, and they read deeper when we give them choice. So there are kids reading on the loft there on self-selected text. Then you can see we put out like books. So anytime we get new sets of books, we encourage kids to browse, talk with each other, think about when they might want to read them, how they might want to respond to them. We also think that offering supported independent reading time is crucial. So when we say independent reading time, that means we should have chances to check in with students. We should have chances to confer with them, for them to chat with each other, and to think about ways to support that time. The next one is create opportunities for talk and interaction. Reading is a social experience, right? And so when we think about readers, we think about learners, and we know that reading isn't always a private act. And so we want kids to think and react and talk about their text. Giving choice and a nurturing environment helps support that. But we've also found that the more opportunities we give them to talk about it, the more independent they are with their reading experiences. The last sort of principle that we use is using assessment to guide instruction. So sometimes people think independence is once kids can read independently, then you never have to revisit it. But we're always trying to think about ways that we can nudge our students. So as I'm watching them independently reading and responding to reading, I want to confer with kids, I want to check in, and I want to think about what I can do either in conferring small group or whole group to kind of take that a little bit deeper. So we try to use, we take a lot of observational notes, we do a lot of kid watching. We really want to work through the process of thinking about what do we know about our students and how can we make their independent time more meaningful for them. And one of the things that we think helps that is really being thoughtful about our environment. And so if we want students to be independent, they have to be able to navigate this environment without us. So here's a picture of Leo, who did a lot of reading research work on nonfiction in laundry baskets. It's one of his favorite spaces to read, and we want to support that. In our environment, we like to think about access and purpose. So this is just a little map on the right of what our classroom currently looks like. But on the left, you'll notice students have access to everything they need. They don't have to ask us for anything. They don't have to seek us out. There are places to sit, places to get stickies, places to do the work of real readers. We also use multi-purpose spaces. So no one has enough room in their classroom to have it like a complete Barnes & Noble. So we have our spaces double. So the place where whole group happens can also be the place where independent reading happens. You'll also notice up in that top corner, Valentina there is adding to the anchor charts. One of the things that we believe about students and their environments is that they need to take ownership of them. So the anchor charts aren't just made by the teacher. It may start with the teacher and whole group, but then we encourage kids to continue thinking about ways to document their learning and share it with peers. Again, it's this idea of a collaborative environment where we think and we talk about reading together, and then independently they can contribute to those classroom spaces that we value and think are so important. The other thing that we think is important is, do kids have comfortable spaces to read? And so some kids like reading in chairs and sitting in desks. Other kids like the loft or beanbags or couches, or you see one there we have sitting on a large stuffed animal. We want kids to enjoy their reading time. And then the library. This is really the heart of our classroom. So kids have to be able to access text, know how to find them, help be able to categorize them. They need to easily be able to access them. The image on the right that you see there is a picture of where they keep and store their books so that they can get to their reading anytime they want to. So all of these components of the environment really sort of lead into our model for fostering independence. So you can see here we sort of think of it as a stepping stone. It isn't this sort of finite, you introduce it, they get it, and you're good to go. We have to think about ways that they can move through the process. So we always start with pre-assessment. And when I say pre-assessment, that doesn't mean that I am giving them a test, right? So the goal is that I want to watch my kids. I want to see what they're already doing well, and then I want to build on that. So start from a point of strength and think about how you can nudge them to go deeper and how they can begin to do that without you. So oftentimes that starts with pre-assessment. For us, most of the time, that's observational notes and talking with kids. And then we move into teaching. So oftentimes we'll need to model something. So what might it look like to have a partner conversation that goes beyond summarizing and asking what you liked? And we might model what those kinds of talk and responses look like. Then we move into scaffolding. So while we wish we could say that we just taught it and everyone got it and they were perfect and kept moving themselves deeper, what we found is we need to continue to watch our students and provide additional ways to support them. That kind of moves into a stage of monitoring and refining where our students are independent and we're helping them really move and respond and read and be independent in the way we want. But then we want to nudge them to really extend and stretch their thinking. So this goes on throughout the course of the year. And then that assessment kind of continues happening, right? So we have a chance to really think about, what are we doing? How do we nudge them deeper? And how are the kids finding joy in their meaningful experiences? What we kind of found was this was built between a combination of things: routines, so both book shopping and independent reading, and then strategies. So how can the kids be strategic? They need strategies if they're going to be reading and responding and chatting independently. So we talk about fix-up and comprehension strategies. We also think they need ways to respond to both narrative and informational text or inquiry projects. And then we also believe in collaborative independence. And collaborative independence gives students opportunities to be independent with their peers without you. So I know sometimes people don't think that that is independence, but for us, this is the ultimate goal of independence, right? It's not that they're working by themselves, but that they're reading and then they have opportunities to get together with partners and to support, to talk and to coach, and then also to move into small group experiences that they can eventually take over on their own so that they can run their own discussion groups, so that they can run their own performance groups. The ultimate goal is independence, but that independence can also be collaborative. So I'm going to share with you a little bit. I'm going to talk first about some strategies that we've found to foster independence. you can use fix-up strategies, and we teach a lot of those, but today I'm just going to chat specifically about ways that we use comprehension strategies to help facilitate deeper meaning making and independence. So we can start with pre-assessing, so you can use things that you know about students, areas where they might need additional support in comprehension, and just check in with them. And then based on what they tell us, we like to think about strategies that students already use. And then we may introduce or review a new strategy. So here we have some examples of anchor charts with a lot of visuals and language frames for English learners and students who might need some additional support about how they might document their thinking. And then this is how we have them begin to think about documenting these strategies. So we give kids access to color-coded stickies. You can see those on the wall there, as well as an anchor chart here that has a handful of strategies that you can see with different language frames. So part of our thinking behind this work with strategies is that we know real readers use strategies to comprehend text, to think about text, to make more sense of text. And so we may introduce a comprehension strategy. Obviously, we wouldn't introduce them all at one time. And then, like you saw in the anchor chart, some visual support, but also for some of our younger learners and English learners, a language frame to kind of give them a running start. And then students, during their independent reading time, are documenting their strategy use. And so this also then is connected to what we're doing in whole group, but then obviously, this is a way for them to document their meaning making, and then to come together in the whole group and or during their partner experiences to talk about what the author's message was, or to talk about connections that they were making. I want to be clear about the ways that we recommend using these comprehension strategies, and the notion that these strategies are not for strategy's sake. So we don't say you need 3 of these, 3 of these, and 2 of these today. The idea is, depending on what you're reading, what is a meaningful way for you to document your thinking that you think might facilitate deeper conversation? And because we found that the documentation of strategies serves a real purpose, facilitating deeper conversations, participation in discussion groups and things like that, we found this sort of reading response or comprehension strategy documentation to serve a lot of purposes. One of the things that we do try to do is make it easy, so it's not particularly time consuming. We don't want to take a lot of time away from their reading and their opportunities to talk about reading. So using stickies of their choice is a very easy way to begin to access and document that kind of work. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of ways that ideas for strategies. We highly recommend Jen Saravallo's Reading Strategies book for a way to think about what you know about your kids and then identifying strategies that might work for them. You can see here we've got some anchor charts on making connections, author's message. This is another example of an interactive chart where students continued to add to it after we were there. We sort of work on an evolution of strategies. So we might start initially when we talked about those stages of facilitating independence with just young learners. You can tell we may have been studying Kevin Hankey's here, thinking about what students think Lily's like. And then as we read Sheila Ray, asking them to provide some supporting evidence. So again, this idea of nudging a little bit deeper, and they can document this on, I think it was a pink sticky, as a way to document it and come back and think together about their reading. We taught everything from visualizing to point of view. Again, just thinking through the needs of our students based on observations and conversations we were hearing them have, and then giving them opportunities to use those strategies in their own self-selected text when they're reading, and then bring them back together to talk about with peers. So you can see here in the monitoring and refining stage, we wanted to move from the initial stage of Sheila Ray to Mean Gene. So you can see there in Mean Gene, we've got some different colors that are taking place in that chart. One of the things that we wanted to do was move beyond just character traits with supporting evidence, but think about how characters change over time and give opportunities to, again, sort of refine that idea of character traits to thinking about what we know about stories and about characters and about how they change over time. So as I mentioned, we used these strategies, and kids put their stickies in there as a way to come back to whole class literature discussion, talk about things that they were reading, talk about how they were thinking about their comprehension, and prepare for discussion group. The other thing we started using these as was sometimes these became students' reading responses, or we wanted a way for them to kind of categorize and organize the things that they were reading. So you can see in this shot here, it's a picture of a reading response that this was actually a first grade student used. And so these were some of the strategies that we had introduced based on what we knew our students needed. And then during independent reading time, students would document with their stickies. So you can see here we had summarizing strategies like sequencing, retell, information that they learn, making connections, inferring and analyzing with different strategies that fell under those categories. And so what happened then was at the end of the week, students had the opportunity to go ahead and turn their thinking in. So this became part of their reading response and a way to categorize some of their thinking. We've tried a lot of different things for reading responses. One of the things that we found with reading responses is that sometimes the reading responses were taking longer than the reading, and we wanted to make sure that they were meaningful. So we had tried some reading logs, but sometimes in the primary grades, it took them longer to write the name and the author than it did for them to actually read the entire book. So we really were trying to be thoughtful about different ways that students could respond to narrative text and informational text. And so part of that started with building on the strategies that students were already using. So we tried to think about things that were working and things that weren't working. So I'm going to share with you some reading responses for narrative, and I'm actually going to start with a kind of silly picture, but a picture that I always use when I'm thinking about reading responses. So my dear friend sent this to me. It was from her first kindergarten parent-teacher conference. You can see the teacher part of the kind of like worksheet prompt says, I want my parents to know I, and then he wrote, do not like writing sentences. And in his picture, he's got a word wall up there, a dancing teacher, and then a kid with a frowny face with his head down on the desk. And I show this to remind myself and to remind teachers that sometimes we ask kids to do things that real readers don't do and that aren't enjoyable. So there might be a reason why they're not working well independently, and some of that has to do with choice, some of that has to do with tasks, some of that has to do with authentic experiences. And so Jake's teacher, who actually was great, she showed this to my friend, and she said, you know, I had no idea. Every time the kids read a book, I make them write a sentence. And she said it was just something they had to do after every single book. And again, well-intended, but it's not something that real readers do. He had no choice in what he was doing, and he didn't want to write the sentences. And so I think we really have to assess engagement, choice, and meaningful and authentic experiences. So what can kids be doing? Well, I try to think about what I do as a reader, right? And so there are lots of things that I do with a reader after I'm done reading. So here you can see the top corner here is a picture of me with my book club. Yes, someone has a little champagne. That's not necessary and obviously not appropriate in school, but real readers read and they talk about it. They get together. We don't come together and check our answers on a comprehension quiz, right? We get together and we chat about the reading. You can see here that I've got a huge set of Mo Willems. So oftentimes I read connected texts by the same author, even if they're not in the same series. You can also see that sometimes I read books on the same topic, but by different authors with mindset and drive and things like that. I also have books that I reread. That discourse analysis book, I totally geek out on and have probably read it 20 times since I was a doctoral student. And so other things that I often do as a reader that were on that slide, I'm on Goodreads, right? So I share and I rate books with my friends. I had a picture on there of my bookshelf, which is actually right behind me, so you don't need a picture of that. But a lot of these books I use as references. I go back, I check in, I reread, I read parts of them. And then the other thing that I put on there was actually an email I sent to another author, because when I chat with teachers about options for ways kids can respond to text, you know, I show them books that I've made notes in and stickies in, but I say I also sometimes write to the author. And I had a teacher once say, no one does that. And I said, well, I do. I mean, I do that as an adult. And so I actually have an email that I sent to Jen Saravallo after her reading strategies book came out. I was using it with some of my graduate students. And so I think we just have to get in the habit of thinking about things that real readers do. And that is the way that we want to begin thinking about responding to reading. And so when we think about pre-assessing things like reading responses, we want to watch kids. What are they doing during reading? What are they doing after reading? Are they documenting their thinking? Are they taking notes? Are they rereading, right? What are some things that you notice that they're doing, particularly in relation for us to maybe sticky use or strategy use? And then we want to teach them to go a little bit deeper. So we've got them in that initial stage. We know what they're doing. Then we want to begin setting goals for prioritizing critical thinking. How do we make this work move beyond literal, right? So a lot of time reading responses fall in that literal category, and we don't want that. That's not the purpose. So you can see here that our students really work on categorizing, taking our own stickies and categorizing between literal and deep responses. And we use that as a way to begin thinking about how we can get students to go deeper. And those are the things that they begin bringing to discussion groups. Those are the things that they begin bringing to the reading response groups. Then we begin setting some goals. So kids can categorize their own reading in the literal or the deeper category, and then they can set some goals for thinking about the work and strategy documentation that they want to do for the following week. This gets us to the part of monitoring and refining. So one of the things that I think is important is that our reading responses are not always teacher-driven. So what I'm going to flip back to in a moment is some ideas for student responses. Again, thinking about authentic purposes, but also new ways to respond. So we like to analyze and nominate. We have character wall where kids get to create a portrait of their favorite character, but the only way the character goes up on the character wall is if a student writes a persuasive piece and the class votes and they believe the character is good enough to go up on the character wall, right? We also do this for, you're gonna see at the end of the clip today, a book award show where we have different categories and students get to nominate books that they think would fall under that category. So you can see here in this slide here, we've got a student who wanted to nominate a book for the best nonfiction book. So during her independent reading time and or reading response for that week, her choice was to write a persuasive piece on why she thought Looking Closely in the Pond was the best nonfiction book, right? So you can see here that they have opportunities to think about strategies. So she's obviously read it, she understood the text, and now she has opportunities to also integrate her writing to think about ways that she might nominate things to, again, be part of the broader class culture of reading. So the final sort of idea of extension for us is really thinking about inspired writing. So we love the work of Katie Wood-Ray and Lisa Cleveland. And so we like to talk a lot about author's craft. So if we're studying Mo Willems, what do you notice? What is an author's style? How does it draw us into his writing? So you can see on this anchor chart, students have identified all of these components. And now I'm going to show you an example of a student who had taken up some inspired writing as a sort of sequel to The Pigeon Wants a Puppy. So I'll just sort of walk you through this quickly and take a note to all of the things she does, right? So illustrations, language, voice. So you see The Pigeon Wants a Walrus. And you'll notice up there it says one walrus, like the end pages in Mo Willems with one puppy. Hello, do you know what I wanted forever? At least since last Monday? It is a walrus, right? So picking up voice, obviously not copying out of the text. She's got some approximated spelling, which we celebrate. Walrus with a little think bubble with hearts. I'm standing here until I get a walrus. I said I wanted a walrus. Now, I love the eyebrow in this one, right? So she's really like thinking about author's craft. It's my dreams. They came true, okay? And then the pigeon realized it's the teeth, it's the fins. I don't understand. Instead, I want a hippo. So when we think about responses to readings, what does this tell us about students? So it's not always just a check off, right? It's a, what do we know that that student got from her reading that she was able to take up in her writing? And I think that's such a powerful way to think about reading responses that we sometimes don't spend as much time on as we should. It's also a great way to connect our reading and writing. And we found that students become so engaged and independent that they only need our support to take it a little deeper. This is an example of a fourth grade classroom that I was working in, and we were studying author's craft of comics, right? So take a look at what she was able to take up here. She's using narrative boxes, speech bubbles, lists. She's got perspective, close-up. All of these things demonstrate students' understanding and documentation of their reading, just in authentic purposes that they're able to kind of share and work through with their peers. Now we're going to talk a little bit about partner talk. So we want kids to talk to each other about text, but we want them to do more than I like the book, me too, right? So we want to think about partner experiences that foster independence without us. In order to do that, we have to do a little bit of modeling first. So we pre-assess our kids. Again, here's just a sample of a note-taking guide. So what are the students talking about during reading? What are they talking about after reading? And we noticed that our kids needed to deepen their talk about what it was that they were reading. So we gave them some options. Maybe they could think about retelling. That was one model for supported talk. But really, we wanted them to begin getting deeper and thinking about an authentic context. So how about book talks? So with their partners, when they came before they did their partner reading, we helped support their language, and we had some English learners. So you'll notice here we have some language frames and transition words as well. But this part of the teaching was really about recommending books to peers and giving opportunities to think and talk about things that they were reading. So you can see here that what would happen was when they got in partners, they would recommend it to their peer. So they would choose one that they had read, or they could choose one that they thought they didn't want to read, but usually they'd like to recommend, and then they'd hold them for each other during book talks. Then we began to think about, okay, how can we move beyond the retell and the book talk? So we continue to kind of observe, take notes, think about what we knew. And then we moved to sort of this notion of monitoring and refining. We did not want to lock them into specific responses of ways that they were talking, but we did notice that our students sometimes felt a little stuck with ways to respond to text. And so you can see we brainstormed together ideas for how we might respond to text, and then we created this bookmark based on those questions. So some of the questions we had were everything from, did you like the book and why, which was classic and something we were hearing, to, who are your favorite characters and why? Did you have any connections? So when we created this bookmark, it's not that this is the end-all bookmark, but as we were working with our kids, we generated ideas with them. What are things that you'd like to know and that you'd like to talk about with your partners when you're reading? And so together we sort of created a list and an anchor chart, and then students could use that if they needed it as a way to talk with one another. And again, throughout this entire process, right, we really tried to watch and observe and think about what students were doing. So in this image, you can see the students are actually partner reading in front of the anchor chart that we used to think about partner reading. And then after they were partner reading, so we observed their partner reading, and when they were done and they had their conversations about their text during and after, we brought them back together and we asked, how did that go? What went well? What didn't go well? Where could you use more support? And how might we make this better? And so some of the feedback from students in that portion was, we're sharing our stickies with each other and we're talking about things that happened in the book, but sometimes my partner gives me a good idea on the same book that I've read, and then I want to go back and document some of my thinking together. So we try to support students thinking about, as they're reading new text, opportunities to also collaborate on documenting their thinking, preparing for discussion groups, and or thinking about reading responses. So you can see here in our extending, we've got two students who are reading the same text together, which they often do during partner reading. And then jotting down thinking together. So going back to those comprehension strategies, knowing that they want to use these strategies when they come back to whole group, or if this book becomes a book club group. So instead of just reading back and forth and talking, we also integrated opportunities to document strategic thinking processes that the students wanted to share with us. So the goal of partner reading is not just for students to read a certain amount of words and other students to help kids out with identifying words, though we do support that, and it does allow students for additional opportunities, but it brings joy, right? So they have choice in what they're reading. They're reading books that they may have read before, and that's okay. They get a chance to talk and share their thinking with partners, and then that also leads us into the possibility of some small group experiences. So when we think about small group experiences, we often think about them in two different ways. Two different types of small group experiences we found to be pretty successful in terms of helping them get to the point where they're eventually running their own. The first one is discussion groups. And I feel like a lot of people have talked about discussion groups, so I'm just going to touch on this briefly today. But in discussion groups, we start with kids in terms of supporting their thinking. So everything that they've done up to this point, right? So you can see our expectations for discussion groups there for literature discussions. And Meredith is meeting with a group of students that she's helping support before they were ready to run their own independently. But one of the things that we think is so important is that all of their reading life is connected. So they get chances to select the book that they want to be in the discussion group about. They get to read it independently and document their thinking, prepare comments, questions, strategy, documentation before they come to discussion group. Then they come to discussion group, and we try to help the students run the discussion groups themselves as much as possible. But in the initial stages of discussion group, we help and support with that language. We give them ideas for things that they might be able to say or add, ways that they make contact so that they're not just looking at us, right? And then once we feel like they're there and they're ready for that extending and that final nudging, then we encourage them to run their own. We just step out and we watch. We take observational notes and we check in with them at the end and say, what went well? What might make next week's discussion group better? And we really try to support them through that process of thinking. We've also started using thinking about performance groups. So one of the things we think about with performance groups is it builds fluency, it gives a purpose for rereading, and it gives kids an audience. We think the arts and drama are a crucial part of students' identity, of their social life, and it's a great way to think about reading and writing as well. So we oftentimes start with poetry performances, and we want to give kids feedback. So when we're thinking about poetry performances, we talk with them, we teach them about volume, clarity, expression, speed, eye contact. So we do really break it down, but in a way that matters, because we'll have a coffee house where kids get to do an open mic night, or they'll have poetry performances, or throughout the week, if kids have been working on readers' theater, then they have opportunities to present it, right? And so we help break down the ideas that here are some things that will help enhance your fluency, your reading fluency, but things that you can do independently in a group and help provide feedback. So then we begin talking about performance audience tips. So the students are working on these in small groups. So they may either be doing a reader's theater, or they may be doing a poetry performance. Either way, they're in small group opportunities where they get to give feedback to their students to help support their performance. So we talk about listening and eye contact, celebrating things that are going well, giving positive feedback based on the things that we've been thinking about as related to performance. And then we give them opportunities to begin self-selecting. So maybe they want to turn in their create their own reader's theater script, right? Or maybe they're going to choose a book and they're going to turn that book into a reader's theater. We have a bunch of scripts in the classroom that the students have opportunities to choose. So during independent time, so we have multiple rounds of, usually at least 2 rounds, sometimes 3 rounds of when students are working independently when we're not working with a small group. So one might be independent reading and responding. The next round might be that they're doing a performance group instead of doing the lit discussion group or a partner group. And what we want them to begin doing is thinking about ways that they want to engage with reading and thinking and talking with others. And so in order to kind of extend that thinking, we also encourage students to start creating their own scripts for different purposes, some for readers theater, but also for class events. So what you're going to see here is this is a picture of two of the hosts of book awards. So we encourage the students to collaboratively write the book award show script. So they all had parts of it, and we had time for them to, obviously they were writing it as part of their inspired writing and responses, but then for the extension, we had time to practice it. And this is where their reading responses of the persuasive text and nominating came into play. And then they were able to present at the end of the year book awards. So this is a class where reading matters and where reading is valued, and everything that we do in reading is connected as opposed to these separate ideas or these separate strategies. The strategies help us think deeper and prepare us for conversation. That preparation allows us to collaborate and make connections with our peers. We can talk and chat about things that are meaningful to us in reading, and then at the end of the year, they can vote on them. What do they love about reading? Where do they want to celebrate? So you'll notice in this clip, there's a small musical performance and a quick edit. This is not perfect. I am behind the camera. This was our first shot at a book award show, but I think you'll get an idea. So take a watch here of a whole class performance group.
2015 Kids Book Choice Awards. Today is all about the books. This special award show is meant to honor all the fabulous books we have read this year and to celebrate us as readers and leaders. The 8 categories include funniest book, best illustrations, favorite author, favorite character, best authors, best editing, best nonfiction, best photographs, and best fiction. Wow, I can't wait to get the show started. Let's start this show with a little fun and music. Hit it, DJ.
Because you know that the books start reading. All that the books start reading.
Now what you have all been waiting for. Best nonfiction and fiction. Let's start with the facts. Here to present the best nonfiction book is our class fact guy, Diego. The nominees for the best nonfiction are Frogs, Rocks and Minerals, Megalodons, Foxes, Fantastic Fish, Sharks, and Animal Hair. The envelope, please. The winner is Rocks and Minerals.
All right, so Rocks and Minerals might not be my #1 choice either, but this is an example of a classroom where kids love reading and they're independent readers. And all of the work that they're doing independently involves choice, involves excitement, involves joy, involves authentic experiences for reading and writing. And so I think that is why these students are able to integrate all of those different components that we want readers to do, because the ultimate goal is that readers can do all of this work without us, right? So our goal that we sort of work them through is thinking about, what do we know about kids? How can we teach it? How can we scaffold it? How can we monitor and refine it? How can we extend it? And how can we keep track of it? And so for us, it's all connected, right? It's about the kids. We're teaching strategies and routines and response opportunities, not for grades, right? We're teaching them because we want these kids to love reading and become better readers. And so we found that through this process of developing independence, students can manage their own challenges and their reading life grows outside of that 90-minute block that we have in class, but it becomes part of who they are, part of their identity, and they're all engaged and involved in this culture. So thank you so much for your attention. It was so great to be part of the Ed Collaborative today, and I hope all of your kids get a chance to love reading as much as the classrooms I've had the privilege to be in.
Lindsey, that was awesome. Thank you so much. It makes my ELA heart like just pound that much faster. I loved the pictures and the video, the book awards. Like that's the cutest thing I've ever seen. I can't wait to go back and rewatch and add more to my thinking from your video. You know, it's one thing to cultivate a love of reading in our classroom. I think a lot of us passionate educators do that, but how do we really nudge readers to new places in their reading lives? You gave me a lot of strategies for thinking about that. How can I push myself in the classroom? How can I help my readers grow in their reading lives? And there's just so much. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today. There was some great tweeting going on, and I hope everyone can go back through and add your thinking to our Padlet page on the EdCollab site. You'll find a link to that across the top of the page there. What a great day of learning, talking about kids and how we can move kids, move ourselves in our practice as well. So thank you so much for contributing to that, Lindsey. And as we move forward, we're looking forward to our closing session with representatives from the Teaching Tolerance. And I'm just excited to see where we can go and where our practice goes. So let's continue to share our learning with the EdCollab Gathering hashtag and staying connected on social media. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Yeah, thanks.